This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Agbero live session. I can see that there are still people coming in, and so what say we start in 2 minutes' time, just to give people time to kind of come in and settle down. I can see that we've got 33 people in the room at the moment, but that number keeps rising, which means that people are still coming in. So I'll give it a couple of minutes, and then we'll start. Yeah. Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome again to the first Agbero webinar. This is one of a series of webinars that are going to be conducted throughout the Agbero program to give you an opportunity to kind of learn about different aspects of the program, to learn something about what's happening at any point in time in the program, and to kind of really focus down on some of the aspects of the learning that we're all going to be doing together over the next series of months. This is our very first one. We don't pretend at all to be experts at webinars, and so we're kind of feeling our way a little bit. And so I hope you're feeling your way a little bit with us, and that you'll kind of forgive us for any technical hitches that happen during the course of the event. I wonder if the person that's got the Ubele Initiative right up in the middle of the screen can take it down, because then I might be able to see some of the people who are in and have something to respond to other than a kind of blank Ubele poster in the middle of my screen. So very quickly, let's introduce a couple of Ubele people who are here to help today and here to share their wisdom on leadership, on governance, on asset transfer. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Sarah. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of Ubele, and I started in February, and I'm delighted to be here.
And Phil?
Thanks, Michael. Yes, my name is Phil Tulba, and I'm the Associate Director for Community Wealth Building. And so the Agbero program, the strategic initiative, actually sits within the program, within the hub that I coordinate, and that's being jointly delivered with Michael's hub.
Okay, thanks very much, Phil. We're going to come back to Phil later on, because Phil's been involved in asset transfers and in kind of thinking about ways in which we can take ownership, take possession, take control of spaces. And we're going to be talking about that in a bit more detail later on. But for right now, I'd like to talk to Sarah before actually we go into a pre-recorded interview that we've done of a local community leader, a woman called Bev Glean, who you'll learn some more about in the video when we play it a bit later on. But Sarah, you've been with Ubele how long?
Since February.
Since February of this year. And you come, I had a peep at your CV, Sarah. Goodness gracious me, you've been doing some stuff. You've been Chief Exec of a local authority?
Yes, yeah. Deputy Chief Exec of a couple of them.
Yeah,
in London.
You've worked for Manchester United?
Excuse me. I only try and work for the best.
Say it again. You only work for the best.
I think I only work for the best. That's why, in fact, I worked for Tottenham Hotspur, but I spent a lot of my career Arsenal, which I have to say are the best.
You know that there's no swearing tonight, don't you? So don't say that word too many times. So you work for Tottenham Hotspur. Did you watch the match on Sunday?
I'm a Gooner.
Oh right.
So
Okay, because Man U beat Tottenham 4-0 on Sunday. Yeah, it wasn't the most exciting match.
That was the
but Sarah, so you've worked at quite a senior level with Tottenham Hotspur and with Arsenal. I understand that you were kind of in the team that got the Emirates Stadium up and running and got people across and into it. That you've been Deputy Chief Executive of 2 local authorities.
Yeah.
Yes,
I have.
What if anything would you say was the kind of what if any lessons about leadership do you think that you've kind of gathered from your kind of experience of doing these things?
Do you know what? It's hard. Leadership is very hard. And I say that in the context that, you know, it's very easy for me to decide, oh, I'm going out now, I'm going to jump in my car or whatever. But when you have to involve more than one person, it's less easy. Because you have to involve them in the decision making, have to involve them in the thinking, and particularly in the thinking that, you know, if I'm going to say I'm going to jump in my car, I'm going up the road now, and who wants to come with me. If I've only got a 2-seater car, isn't anybody coming with me? So leadership, I think, becomes harder as you're trying to lead more people. There's also it's also quite interesting with leadership, because some people lead by virtue of fear, okay, and they get followers by virtue of fear. And in some respects, you might ask yourself, is that natural leadership? Is it genuine leadership? And you do have to think about yourself, whether, if you look at yourself when you're a child, when you're growing up, are you a natural leader? And some people are, and some people aren't. Some people will naturally have people follow them or want to be with them, and some people don't. But in any event, you have to work on it, because you do have to take people along. And the bottom line is, actually, you only achieve if everybody else is achieving, because you're not an island. And if I'm in a leadership position and I'm setting a strategy and I want it to happen, I've got to make sure that those people that are on the front line really interacting with our consumers and our customers, understand it, engage in it, and want to be part of it. And I think I would say one thing that my experience with local authority, typically the local authorities I've worked with or I've been involved in, which typically are in London, so I can't speak for outside of London, we're fantastic at writing strategies, producing strategies. In terms of the final document might be fantastic. They don't necessarily engage people as they should engage people in it, but actually executing those strategies, not so great as good as. You have to involve others in the execution. You have to involve others in the development of it. So it's hard, but you have to know what you're trying to achieve overall and stay focused on that. And sometimes you have to make some very, very difficult decisions.
So part of the foundation of a good leader is this idea of having people come with you, of being able to take the crowd, and that we as individuals should look at what skills we have to be able to take others, and that we all will have different skills that we'll have to employ at different times to take people with us. And so that's part of the platform of a good lead, of a good leader. When you're leading an organization, though, there's this idea of governance, isn't there, as well, which is part of that platform onto which a leader will build. What's governance?
It is, but you can have so first of all, if we just take away leadership from well, think of leadership. Anybody can be a leader. You've got formal leaders. So all of us that are on this screen at the moment, we're formal leaders in Ubele because of our senior management roles and our responsibilities. But you will also have formal leaders as you look throughout Ubele, and you'll have informal leaders in every organization. There's probably many informal leaders, people that aren't necessarily in formal managerial positions, but are very, very influential within that. So you have to have that appreciation of them from that side, from a governance side. So, and I do want to separate the two.
Separate what, leadership and governance?
Governance, yeah. For the purposes of this, I'm going to respond to your question, because governance is about being accountable for things that belong to other people, and you're governing it in a safe way and in a proper way and in an appropriate way. And so governance in an organisation, so if I think of the organisations that are properly on this webinar, if I think of Ubele, I think of the organisations that I work for. So let's take Tottenham Hotspur's charity, which I ran. That was an organisation which got funding from Spurs itself, significant funding from Spurs, significant funding from fans by way of donations to the foundation, and funding from funding bodies, People's Postcode Lottery, National Lottery, all of those. And for each one of those people, so I'm sure, Michael, if your brother said to you, assuming you got brother, it might be a sibling or whatever, or someone close says to you, hey, lend me £5, you might just give them £5. If they say, hey, lend me £5,000, can I borrow £5,000 from you? You might think, hold on a minute, what do you want it for? What are you going to spend it on? When am I going to get it back? What difference is it going to make? And governance is making sure that all of those things can be answered for those with whom we're looking after their resources. And with governance, particularly in organisations, every incorporated legal entity, and I think most of the people on this call will be from incorporated bodies, you will have a governance structure whereby there might be a few that normally are elected, some may be selected, that are responsible overall for that business, for the organisation, for whatever the entity is, pursuing its outcomes in a legal way, pursuing its outcomes with why it's been given resources or what it's told others it will do. And obviously abiding by all legislation that applies. It's a big task.
I really liked that really simple framing of governance, and I've not heard it before, but it's the rules you put in place to look after the things that don't belong to you, that belong to other people.
Yeah, and actually keeping them safe.
And keeping them safe, yes. Yeah. I remember when I ran a company and I suddenly came to a realization that even though I thought it was my company, I had started it, I was doing it, I thought it was mine. And I remember my coach saying to me, Michael, you know that the company is separate to you, that it is a legal entity in itself. It's not a part of me. I might feel as if it's a part of me. I might feel as if it is me, but actually it's a legal entity in its own right, and that the governance are the rules that we put in place to look after that legal entity that we call our organisations.
That's a really important point as well. And I think the other point that you made where you spoke about you thinking it was yours, you know, what can happen in our communities, in community organisations, in charities, or in anything that we set up, it's something called founders syndrome. So what happens, and think of a normal life cycle of a business. So a normal life cycle of a business, you know, you're starting up a business, it might be just yourself and a few others doing things. And actually, ideally, it gets better and better and you get bigger and bigger, but still on a manageable scale. Within about 2 or 3 years, you can continue on a manageable scale, but within 2 or 3 years of a normal business, I'm talking about our organisations being businesses in that context, you have to decide whether or not to grow. Oh, by the way, people, I've broken my hand, so I'm in a sling. So that's
I was
why
wondering what that blue thing on your arm was.
It's a sling on my hand, the splinters, you know. But so what happens is you have to then decide, do I grow, do I get bigger? And to get bigger, you then have to start employing more people other than your busy mates or your family. You then have to start taking risks, you have to start taking on things. And how that can sometimes feel, I'll just go back to the example you gave, Michael. I've got no idea about what your business was like, but I have come across businesses, quite a few of them. I've come across quite a few of them where, from a governance perspective, I've gone in and said, hold on a minute, is this your business? And I'm often then pointing at the founder, or is this a separate legal entity which your board, which may be directors, it may be non-executive directors, it may be members, whatever the legal construction, or is it a separate legal entity where this board is responsible for?
Okay.
And often it comes to the individual. There you go.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sarah. And we're going to come back to the idea of the company separate to you, the organisation separate to you, governance, our responsibility to the thing that we are supposed to be looking after. After we've heard a clip from Beverley Glean, who's the artistic director of Irie Dance Company, and she's going to tell you a bit about her own history in this work, in this clip. Can we have the clip, please? So welcome to our conversation. I'm Michael Hamilton. I'm one of the directors of the Ubele Initiative. And you are?
I'm Beverley Glean. I'm the founder and artistic director of Irie Dance Theatre. And we are here at the Moonshot Centre, one of the dance studios in which we're sitting in.
Why don't we start this conversation at the very end? Because that's in a way, that's where we got to, and then we'll come back to stuff. But I was really enjoying just talking about I suppose the relationship between you and Irie and how that relationship ends or changes and where you end up and who you end up being.
Wow. How, where the relationship ends. I mean, that's a good thought process, because I think just in terms of where it ends, I would really like to leave this organization in a place where there's a really solid foundation. So whoever comes after me have something to build on, or to take to another level. Yes, but that there is still that focused understanding in terms of who we are and why we do what we do, but they're able to use that as a kind of springboard to develop their, I suppose, their own ideas, their own creativity around that foundation.
When I was thinking about Beverley, Glean and leadership, I think I said to Christopher earlier on that there are kind of screaming leaders who everybody's yelling, oh, that's the one that leads that, that's the one that leads that. But you've kind of had this kind of quite silent and solid leadership, and we need all sorts of leaders, you know.
No, absolutely. And I think, yeah, there's room for the screamers. There's room, but I think, you know, leaders come in all shapes and sizes. And so quite often people will come into the building and they won't even know that I'm the artistic director, because how we flex as an organization has a very kind of communal, collective feel. But I think that, you know, I might move on and, you know, somebody else with very different way of kind of managing and leading may come into the organization. But I think as long as that vision and that mission is solid, then, you know, you can't go wrong. You shouldn't go wrong. But the governance too, and that wraparound is key.
So you built a community, and then you found the resource to hold that community in terms of space, and you found the resource to hold that community in terms of finance. You applied for an Arts Council grant, and you were holding leadership. What did that mean? What does it mean that you were holding leadership?
Yeah, but the thing was, I mean, I didn't realize at the time that I was a leader.
Right.
I mean, I think years later, when kind of people come back and say, "Oh, you were leading a process there," but actually, I was just doing what I felt came naturally to me, but also it was a kind of there was that vision of wanting people to understand what I was doing as a dancer and the dance language that I kind of wanted to put out there. So I was leading, yes, but I don't think I really
You wouldn't have given it
understood.
that language.
No way. I would not have called myself a leader in that context.
Is there anything about your leadership journey that you think that you'd like to share?
Oh gosh, I mean, I still struggle is probably not the right word, but that label of leadership, because for me it's really always been about kind of just knowing yourself and trying to understand as best as possible the people that work with you, and kind of just honing into their skills and talent, and finding a way of allowing that to be part of the overall structure. So not to micromanage, but also just give people enough room to develop their skills, but at the same time make sure that they're kind of working within the certain parameters of the organization. So and then sometimes there are people who are great at that. They will come in and they go, oh, wow, this is amazing. And then there are other people, you know, they need to have a kind of a helping hand, because there's some people who just need to be or want to be want to be managed.
Hey, welcome back. And Beverley started in as an amazing conversation, and I think the rest of the conversation is going to be available on YouTube. I think the link is going to be sent out. But Beverley started Irie just because she saw the need for something. She saw the need for Black dance to be respected and treated in a particular kind of way, and she saw the impact that would have on other Black people and the importance of that. And she'd also, when she talked just then, she talked about the importance of vision and mission. How much does that impact on governance? How much does that impact on leadership? The idea of vision and mission. Do you think, Sarah?
I think it's hugely important. And if I can draw on at least one example for that. And it's often how it's how sometimes that we as communities can decide we want to do something. But so you spoke about, or Beverley spoke about her vision and having a space for Black people and dance. And I'm going to use an example with the actually I'll use an example with the Stephen Lawrence Trust. I was chair of the Stephen Lawrence Trust for a while. And it was at a time, so the Stephen Lawrence Trust had been established. It was after the murder of Stephen, been established, and it had been identified that there needed to be something long-lasting, a legacy for Stephen in his memory. And the trust at the time, I wasn't part of the trust at the time, I knew of them. They'd been probably going for about 2 or 3 years. And some of the larger funders had sort of said, we're setting aside resources to enable you to develop your concept, develop what you want, and then we will make the resources available if it's something that can be sustainable. They'd spent 2 or 3 years doing this, and they hadn't got up to a place where the funders felt it would be sustainable. And I'd actually been doing some work at that time for a couple of the funders on a self-employed basis. And they asked me to go and speak with Doreen to see if I could assist or help in any way to break what they viewed as a logjam. So I went along and I didn't know Doreen. I spoke to Doreen, and first of all,
so Doreen is Doreen Lawrence, the mother of Stephen Lawrence, yeah?
Yes, okay. Sorry, yes, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, the mother of Stephen. I didn't know Doreen, so I went along and I sought to have a meeting with Doreen. And one of the things, first of all, Doreen was a bit skeptical of me because I'd been sent by the potential funders. And I basically said to them, I was able to say to Doreen, we need to really identify what we're going to do, what's going to be taken forward. Otherwise, there's a danger of potentially losing this pot of money, as these funders and the government that was behind it at the time, they're all on a short life. And if you think about this from your local authority or whoever your supporters are, some people are only there for a 4-year term. And often what we want to do is long term. So you've got to have something that overrides all that politics. Anyway, the bottom line was that when I looked into all of this, and it transpires that the funders were being very supportive of the Stephen Lawrence Trust, but what that support was through sending in consultants all the time. And as consultants went in, their vision, what they originally had for the Stephen Lawrence Centre, was getting watered down, for the Stephen Lawrence Trust, was getting watered down and down, because consultants were coming in and overlaying it with some of their own views or some of their new ideas. So that vision, what was that dream that they had, they were never able to grasp onto because it was being dissipated by others, not intentionally. So I said to the funders, I said, actually, if we really want to make a difference, put the resources in the hands of the Stephen Lawrence Trust to appoint the consultants themselves and then brief them all themselves so that they get what they want as the vision. And in the end, what the Stephen Lawrence Trust originally wanted to develop an architectural college because Stephen was studying to be an architect. But it realised as it went through that process, and that was during one of Doreen Lawrence's Baroness first dreams, as they went through that process, they realised to establish a highly successful architectural school in Southeast London, where architecture was viewed very much that students always clamoured to go to the few professional schools. It would be hard to make that a sustainable business without a huge amount of subsidy. And again, you have to think, how are these things going to be financed? Because often in our communities or where we're based, that actually the end consumer we're trying to attract doesn't have the resources. And so so what we developed was not an architectural school, but we maintained the support of the architect profession, which was vital. Again, with any concept or entity, you've got to be able to sell that vision to the specialists or professionals in that field, because they will always help you.
And what's the importance of selling your vision within your organisation? So you have to sell your vision externally. What does it mean to sell your vision internally?
Well, you develop it internally. You're selling it externally often, but you're developing your vision internally. You have to have a team around you that can help shape it for you. So you might start off with one idea, and it might be you, the dominant person, that's got that idea, and I want to do this, I want to do that. But it's only through your team that are contributing to that it becomes actually, this is what we want to pursue. And this is now what we can share that vision and dream with others, value stakeholders, I call some of the others, because they're key partners who can help bring value. If you do not sell that vision, or if it's only you going around with that vision, it's not going to work. Because what people will come back and say, you may have the vision, Michael, but anytime I meet anybody from your organisation, they don't seem to get it. It's so important.
We've talked about governance, and governance is that looking after the thing that doesn't belong to you, your responsibility for the thing, and the rules that you put in place to look after the things that don't belong to you. Leadership is about driving something forward, taking something on, making something happen. Does your vision sit in your governance, or does it sit in your leadership, or is it important to have it in both? Where does the vision sit?
It's important to have it in both, you know, and as you ask it like that, Mike, it's sometimes much more difficult if you say what's governance and what's leadership, and you ask another person. They overlap.
They overlap.
They overlap. They very much overlap, because, to be honest, whatever, you know, if you all think here and you think, well, what's the vision for my business, for my organisation, or what am I trying to do? What's my vision? You should really, in an ideal world, you have a very clear vision, and that vision should be 10 years hence, probably, which then you can break down. What does it look like in 9 years, 8 years, 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 4 years time? And governing that, making that happen, you need to know what it looked like in 3 years, 4 years. What are those milestones? And you're looking at it as you progress during the period of time, you know, monitoring, reviewing performance. But leading is making others engage in that as well. And it's making it take it forward. You know, we've all met people, and this is another thing about leadership. You know, nothing is about one person on their own. Even if you're a marathon runner, you've got a whole team behind you. Even if you're that boxer in that ring, you've got a whole team behind you. It is always about working with others and alongside others. Now, in a team, as a leader of a team, you need to be leading a team where there's people that are not like you, possibly people like you, and possibly people that in some ways may get on your nerves. And I use that in the sense, and a good leader can work with all of these people, because if some of us in this room may have done these sort of psychometric tests or management tests to understand our psyche a little bit, and there's sometimes a term that will come over that you're a completer finisher. You dot all the I's and you cross all the T's. There's others that are not like that at all. They're all creativity and imagination and just want to run off. And you've got to have a mix. Sorry.
I'm just saying that I'm one of those with creativity, imagination, and want to run off, and I don't know what it is to cross an I or dot a T.
So imagine you were trying
your
to
vision, and so as I'm beginning to understand this, that your leadership that is informed by the vision, and the leadership is kind of taking people towards your vision. So the vision sits in your leadership, but this vision also sits in your governance, because it's the way that you plan to make that happen. Your governance is, how do I look after this child? How do I look after this organization? How do I look after this other thing so that it grows in a particular way, so that it grows to becoming the thing that will satisfy my vision, my vision. Yes.
Yeah. So you
So
need
governance sits in both places. Vision sits in both places.
Vision is vitally important, of the utmost importance. To be honest, you know what? Otherwise, if you can't create a vision for people, and I'll give you an example actually with Arsenal Stadium. So my role, have you got time? It's 2 minutes.
I've got 30 seconds before we need to go to the other clip, because where I want to go to is, I know that some of the people in this space have a vision to take possession, to take ownership, to take a greater responsibility for physical spaces. And I want to look with Phil Tulba, who's I think an expert at this, how they might be able to begin to realize that aspect of their vision.
If I can just say one thing, I would not call that the wanting of a building, a vision. I'd call it a mission.
A mission.
The wanting of a building itself is probably not the be all and end all. They want a purpose. Okay, and the purpose is the bigger vision.
Right.
The mission, one of their missions at the time might be to get a building. So my vision is to be looking after kids and have a fantastic farm where kids can come for holiday. Obviously, one of the missions, first of all, get a farm. But that helps me pursue the vision. That's all. So I'm sure people will say you need to know what you need a building for. Why is a building important for you?
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for kind of sharing that, and thanks for sharing your kind of many years of experience of being involved in this at a kind of really very senior level. And I hope that Agbero and people from Agbero and all of our participants are going to be able to draw on you and to draw on your experience in some ways over the coming months. But let's go to the second clip from Beverley Glean. Oh, and while we're finding that, I'd like to remind people you can put comments, you can put questions, you can put ideas for the conversation into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those as we go along.
I'm just thinking about the building that you're situated in, and that we're kind of doing this interview in Moonshot. And I'm thinking that Moonshot was born out of a vision, a very kind of clear vision of a group of people. And as I understood that vision, it really coincides with the work that we've recently done at Ubele around kind of having a place to call home, because Moonshot was kind of almost born out of Sybil Phoenix's call for the black community in Lewisham. We need a place that is ours. We need a place to call home. Do you see the kind of tie-up between you and Moonshot and what it is? And definitely.
I mean, I think Mrs. Phoenix really, for her, I think it was about trying to address the kind of unmet needs of young black people in the community. But in a way that was about uplifting them as well, not simply just going, oh, here's a space we could just come and play games, but there was learning. There was programs for young mothers. There was dominoes. There was football. There was all of those kind of cultural things that these young people could get involved in. I think that there were courses being run in the space as well. So there was arts, there was culture, and it was black people doing it for themselves.
Right. Its other significance, of course, is the people that grew and from Moonshot and the people that,
Absolutely.
you know, we talk about Sybil Phoenix. I know that Baroness Ros Howells
Yeah.
was kind of a part-time youth worker here
Yeah.
and on the management
Yeah.
committee. That a whole range of people kind of came out
of this space.
Out of this space.
Yeah, and I think this space became, I mean, I really see this space as an historic building for this community, for the Black community. And I think that, you know, the Moonshot was here in a time that in 1981 with the Moon Cross Fire, and this building was
the centre.
Significant to that.
Yeah.
It was a space where the victims and the families were able to come into a space where it's non-judgmental, and they could kind of just talk about what was happening with them and how they were going to take the whole process forward. The march that happened, the Black People's Day of Action, started out in the park, and that started in this space. So it was a very significant building, and we totally understood that. We understood that, you know, that we were kind of riding on the backs of these people and these events that had happened, and we wanted to make sure that whatever we were doing here carried that philosophy with us, which is about the culture, which is about uplifting young people, middle-aged people, adults, elders, really just a real shared artistic and cultural experience in the space.
And I suppose, you know, in 1980, blah, 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 when the new building came to life.
This building as it stands now.
This building as it stands now came to life. 81?
No. This was in 79, 80, the local people, along with, there was some regeneration happening in the locality, in Deptford specifically, and along with the local people, so, because the original building, which was just across, got burnt down.
Right.
And so with some regeneration money and the local people buying, they had the scheme where they would pay for a brick. So I think that's why there is this real passion that, like, people feel that they have ownership of this building because they pay for the brick.
I remember, I have a story about a friend of mine who was the manager for a very brief amount of time, another dancer, in fact.
Right.
And she came and she found it really difficult to contend with people's sense of ownership of the space and Lewisham's sense of ownership of the space. And it was difficult to kind of marry those two things because the people, this is our building, this is how we run it.
Absolutely.
Why do you think you can tell us what to do with it? But at that time, kind of ownership might have meant we had a management committee that looked after it, or we had trustees that were responsible for the vision. As we're kind of moving forward in 2024, and we're seeing and learning from what has happened up until now, is that ownership means freehold. Ownership means that nobody can take it away from us. Ownership means that we embed who we are in a place absolutely permanently by making it legally ours as well. And so are Irie involved in that journey with the community?
Most definitely. I think that, you know, assets and ownership, that's something as Black communities we are still waiting for. We own very little in our communities, and even though our lives and our history is embedded in places that we still have no ownership of. I think that the issue around community and building assets for your community is hugely important. And I just think the way society is going at the moment, that if we're not looking to own and embed, especially land and property for ourselves, then I think so much will get lost in terms of who we are and our presence within our local communities.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverley Green. I'd like to bring forward Phil Tulba. He's switched his camera and his microphone off, but he's going to switch them on again now because he's going to join us in this conversation. Particularly, Phil, because you have a history of working with something called asset transfers. What is that, Phil?
Yes, thanks, Michael. I mean, asset transfers refer to a range of different types of things. There's some aspects that are sort of enshrined in law. So there are a set of legal processes that go back to something called the Localism Act 2011, and specifically is around community right to bid. And is really about a community's set of rights that enable them to secure buildings and land, to take them out of risk for a short period of time from disposal, sale into the market at market rate. So it gives communities an opportunity to bid and to try to secure that asset in perpetuity. But that shouldn't be confused with something called community asset transfer, which is broadly the same, but is very much voluntary. So local authorities, public bodies can dispose of assets into community ownership through a CAT, a community asset transfer, CAT. And that this typically is land, buildings, and as I said, it's very much a voluntary process. And part of that is really about engaging in a conversation with local authorities or the public body to help them understand what the benefit is for the local community that will benefit from the transfer. So it's within the gift of local authorities to transfer assets into community ownership. Typically, that does mean long leases, so sort of around about 25 years. But actually, if you're a new organization or you are struggling to perhaps demonstrate your kind of resilience or your track record, then the local authority might offer a shorter term lease. Why leases terms are important is that funders, especially if the building requires refurbishment and upgrade, funders will really look at 25 years or longer if they're putting in significant amounts of capital. Some funders will go lower than that, but you're looking at 15, 20, 25 years for a community asset transfer lease. But communities can also get hold of the freehold as well. But it's important to understand, is it an asset or is it a liability?
When we were talking with Sarah, and as I listened to Bev, and we kind of got into this idea of leadership, of governance, and of vision, is there a relationship between those three things and securing assets? What is? Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was struck by Sarah's comment right at the end, and I think there was actually a question from Valerie around what is the difference between vision and mission, and this thing purpose, and just to sort of refresh, the vision being that longer term goal, objective, the blue sky vision that you've got for that future that you would want to see for your community and your organization. Mission for me is something a bit more action orientated. It's a bit more medium term and immediate, and are the types of things that you'll do to help you realize that vision. And it might be that the building is part of that. Is the building the vision? I would perhaps urge against that, but actually is the building part of a mission that helps you realize that vision? Then I think that's very much the case. But it's worth just bearing in mind in the context of a place to call home, and the assets, some of the assets that we reviewed, going back 30, 40 years ago that came into some form of community ownership. There's a bit of a spectrum there in terms of long leases, short leases, community asset transfer. But the idea that actually, in many cases, communities were given assets, or they were campaigning to secure a building that they meant something to them and gave them a sense of place. And then all of a sudden they end up owning this damn thing or controlling this damn thing, but without a plan, really without a vision. And there's a challenge there around how you make that transition between sort of activists, in a sense, and I'm not using that in a negative term, to sort of asset owners and building managers. And that's some of the stuff that we will be actually exploring in the latest series of the Agbero program and webinars. But those are very important things. So absolutely, you know, vision and mission are key. The asset, you know, the building should be and could be part of that, but you just need to be clear what purpose does that serve. It might be some groups do very, very well just renting space, and it might be work very well for organizations operating out of meanwhile type arrangements, so 6 to 12 to 24 month type arrangements. If that's part of your business model, that supports your vision and purpose, absolutely great. But I've also had conversations with organizations that have emerged out of the pandemic, and it is their intent to secure space for their communities as part of this longer term vision, and they recognize they need to go on a journey. So we've got quite a mix of organizations already, but I think just being clear on what the vision is and the mission and how you want to achieve that is very important.
So Agbero begins almost with some assessments of organizations which are looking primarily at their kind of governance and their governance structures. Why does it begin with the idea that we've got to have strong governance in order to move to this?
Yeah, thanks for that. So actually there are a series for that. So for the 32 organizations, so we had over 132 registrations for expressions of interest for Agbero. So the Agbero Live webinars are part of our offer to our Agbero community. So welcome to you all. 50 organizations will be offered masterclasses and training and additional online support. And of that 50, 32 will go forward to have an assessment. And those assessments will look at a range of criteria from things like governance and leadership, sort of financial resources, systems, impact measurement, connectedness and engagement with your community. So that's a piece of work that Carl Murray will be undertaking, and there'll be some specific support provided to organizations in those around those kind of 6 areas. But coming back to the point around governance and leadership, this is absolutely critical in the sense that, you know, so what, you want a building, so you've got a building, so what now? So actually you need to have robust leadership, you know, clear leadership, robust governance structures to help you manage this building in a sustainable way that enables you to realize your vision. So actually it's very, very important that this work around governance and leadership is done. And moreover, as part of the process of a community asset transfer or a community right to bid, where you are trying to secure an asset from a local authority or public body, they will look at your leadership, they will look at the people, and they will look at your governance, and they will make a determination, a decision. Do we give them a 25-year lease? We might decide to dispose of the asset as a freehold to them, or even sell it to the community. Or you know what, maybe we'll just give them a little, you know, 5-year lease, and we see how they do, and we just keep them bubbling along in 5 years. So actually having very strong, you know, clear leadership and a strong governance structure will help with making that case to the public body.
This is what Carl Murray calls investment ready. Are you investment ready? And can you prove your investability? Just before we go on, we've got a question in the chat. And the question is, are there any cases of people securing land under CAT as community gardens from their local authority? Do we know the answer to that?
Well, I would say that yes, there are examples. I did some work in, I think it was Lambeth many, many moons ago, but certainly there may be examples around the country where groups of, you know, friends of and communities have come together and have been able to secure green space. I think it's just worth bearing in mind how local authorities want to treat kind of open green spaces and this idea of an asset transfer. And it might be that you get into conversations around stewardship or custodianship or kind of access. So it really depends on, you know, what your vision is and what the local authority is prepared to or is able to allow you to do within the constraints they might have around green spaces, for example. But there will be some examples, and maybe I think as we roll forward with the program, we find some case studies of you know, green spaces, public spaces, and kind of access and control of these spaces. And I just Lord actually has just put something in the chat.
Mentioned Wolves Lane.
Talk about Wolves Lane. Yes, I mean that's a former local authority nursery, But absolutely, the Wolves Lane Consortium, of which Ubele's one of two partners, has a 25-year lease on a former local authority nursery, which includes some open land and some glass houses.
Sorry, I was just trying to read that long question in the chat. We would like to go down the route of community ownership, but need help to start the process. So I think that the Camberwell's after school project are amongst the 30 to the smaller group in Agbero, and so that's something that we could perhaps pick up with them, because it's actually a very specific question about their organisation. Where are we in terms of Agbero at the moment, Phil? Where is the project? What are next steps? What's happening? We've got about 4 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah. So as I said, we had there was a deadline of March the 15th. We had 132 organisations express an interest to join the programme. So quite a significant level of interest. From there, with the funding that we have available across London and England, we were only able to take forward 50 organisations into a series of masterclasses and training. So those organisations have already been notified of the 50, and in due course we'll start notifying around those dates for those particular workshops. Parallel to that, there's been 32 organisations that have been invited to have an induction with Carl for the assessments. We had someone May the 2nd, someone May the 9th, and I think there are a couple of others that we need to do some sort of bespoke one-to-ones. But those 32 organisations will have had an induction for the assessments, and then there'll be in the next few weeks there'll be a kind of pre-assessment. So using a typology and an assessment tool that will create a report and an action plan, and that's for the 32 organisations. And then throughout the late summer and into the early autumn, we will be inviting consultants onto a framework to be able to then provide some bespoke support to those 32 organisations. We don't intend to leave everyone else hanging to dry. We will still be providing, communities of practice to the 50 organisations that have been invited into the programme. And for the wider Agbero family, we'll be providing other access to opportunities to webinars and information. The next webinar in this series is in 2 weeks' time, so May the 28th, and there will be sequenced programme 2 weeks. So you should be hearing, or should have received, some communication about that certainly in the coming days.
Okay, we've got one last question then, and it's please, what are the strategies to use to secure these assets, as we've been prospering for these in Manchester City Council for years, although we have funding in view if we could secure the property.
Gosh, in 30 seconds.
In 20 seconds.
In 20 seconds. I mean, we do have a series of Agbero Lives where we'll be getting into committee assets in a little bit more detail. So I would encourage you to join, and those that are interested in that, to join that particular webinar. And for the 50 and the 32, there'll be some more bespoke support around that. But, one of the first things I'll do is see if your local authority has a community asset transfer policy. That's your starting point. And then look at what practice, what examples of community asset transfer have they already undertaken, and reach out to those groups and talk to them and ask them how they went about it. So that would be sort of a couple of sort of top tips I would suggest that you could do immediately before we can get into the webinars later.
Thanks very much, Phil. Phil, thanks for bringing your expertise. Thanks for holding that expertise within Ubele for a while, so that I can get hold of them. People from the Agbero programme will be able to access your expertise as well. Just before we end, just finally, Sarah, just back to you. Is there anything that you'd like to say to finish off before we close tonight's webinar? You've got to turn your microphone on.
I did write what I wanted to say, but I think one of the other things just to get out from governance and leadership is to also, when we spend more time on this, think very carefully about what your governance body looks like, in the sense that governance and executive are supposed to have different roles. They should have different roles. It's very, very hard when you're in community organisations to recognise that distinction in the sense of how they were set up. But because we are so dependent on those experts that are often sitting on the non-exec part, on the governance part of our things. So please think about that when you think about leadership, the importance of working with your governance board and the executive and staff.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this first webinar in the series. As Phil said, the next one is in 2 weeks' time, and notices will come out to you for that. Thanks very much, everybody. And it leaves to me to say good night. Thanks very much, and good night, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, and thank you, Michael. Very well hosted.
Thanks, Phil.